Well, welcome, Bruce Tift, to our podcast. We're so delighted to have you.
Thank you. It's very pleased to have you invite me.
It's wonderful. We've known each other for 20 years, I guess, off and on, and your work has been incredibly meaningful and valuable in my journey, and so it's a real honor and pleasure to get to explore these things with you on the episode.
Well, thank you. Yeah, I'm glad our work has been helpful. That's great.
Yeah. So for folks who maybe haven't read Already Free or who are unfamiliar with your work, could you give us a little bit of an introduction for the audience as far as how, what your career has been about, what you're up to, how you look at the experience of psychotherapy with the Buddhist lens?
Sure, that's a big topic. We could go hours on that, but let's see. Well, short version is that I started a doctoral program in the late 60s at CU, and after 1 year, just couldn't take the sort of the mindset that I found, which is that sort of an assumption that if you were the psychologist, you were sane, and if you were the client, you were neurotic. And they were also approaching a scientist model, so it wasn't a good fit anyway. So I left the country, traveled around for a couple of years, and had experience of especially the Tibetan community and in India and Nepal, and that was very impactful for me. So when I got back to the States, at a certain point, I re-engaged with my interest in psychotherapy from a Buddhist point of view, and went through the Naropa program. And so I've been working in agency and private practice since 1979. So it's 40 some years now. And my work, of course, has evolved over time. But I'd say currently, I, first of all, don't see my role as being like a change agent or somebody who's helping somebody improve themselves, but I see my role, as much as I'm able, to be sort of a location of awareness and allow whatever that person I'm working with, their how they manifest, what they believe, how they talk to themselves, all of those things, sort of engage with an attitude of openness. And so it's okay with me if somebody changes or not. I hope it's the work is valuable and they find useful change, but that's not my intention, because I have an idea that the more we are aware more and more and more frequently, probably we will engage with our life more skillfully. And I always am working from a ground of powerlessness, not just my work, that's my life in general, meaning that I don't have any sort of idea that I have the power to change anybody. I can influence people, of course, I'm influenced, but basically I work with people as if they're adults. I don't work in a transferential model, if that's familiar to people listening. So a lot of my work's sort of very in alignment with my Buddhist training. So I start with what might be familiar as a Hinayana approach, focusing on personal responsibility, taking better care of oneself, basic kindness toward whatever arises, things like that. In Western language, I work more from a masculine energy separateness point of view. Many therapists work from a more connecting feminine energy point of view, to use that jargon. We don't have to say masculine and feminine, but a lot of cultures call it that. And I think both are valid, but my particular sort of style comes from more of a beginning of owning one's fundamental aloneness, personal responsibility, things like that. And in a less obvious way, a lot of what I actually do is invite, in a variety of ways, a type of deconstruction of somebody's familiar identity drama and familiar formulas about engaging with their life. And I assume that people will have contradictory feelings about that work. So I tend to sort of go in and out of a type of more sort of disturbing interaction to stepping back and then go into more disturbance. So I sort of go back and forth in that way. But my overall intention is to bring sort of openness into engagement with form, or in meditation terms, like bring formlessness into engagement with form, or absolute into engagement with relative. And that's what I have found to be most helpful for me. And so I offer to others that's helpful, has been helpful for me, but I don't assume that I or any therapist am going to be the best fit for everyone. So, we're all profoundly limited. And so different people can benefit from different approaches, of course.
Let's hang with the concept of deconstruction for a moment. So deconstructing this internal narrative drama, are you talking ego? And so I'm curious, from your perspective, is the whole process about deconstruction? Are you ever reconstructing anything, or is basically your work about deconstructing narratives and ideas about oneself that aren't true, and that's all your work is about?
No, I think for almost all of us, it would be impossible to just deconstruct what's familiar and just rest in open awareness. So we are, in fact, going to spontaneously come up with new constructions. But even from a Western point of view, most of the ways in which we are trying our best to take the best care of ourselves possible, especially around core vulnerabilities, turn out to be ways in which we learned to do so as very young, powerless, immature, dependent children. So most people are still trying to take care of themselves, which is healthy, but in ways that are at least several decades out of date. So when we deconstruct these dramas, which have to be maintained, actually, they don't have an objective essence that's just there. They have to be usually unconsciously, perpetually maintained. When we interrupt that maintenance process, then we are, in fact, going to come up with different versions, but hopefully, at least at a very relative level, those versions of self and reality will be more in alignment with current adult capacities and current adult realities.
Maybe you could give an example of best case scenario of this massive deconstruction, not a long story, but just the best case scenario of you got this big deconstruction process happening of an old story from childhood, and then it's reconstructing into something that's much more useful. Like let's put this a little practical for people of what that looks like.
Sure. Do you have any favorite identity drama of your own that you're aware of?
Right now?
Yeah.
I would say the biggest process in my life that kind of nags at me on and off is around food. Let's talk about that. Okay.
Like having a compulsive or addictive relationship with it, or just being very sensitive to it, or what?
I would say that it's just about, I know how I operate best with food, what I eat when I'm operating best, and I'm often being a little more compulsive. I mean, relatively speaking, we're not talking about, I'm eating processed fast food every day. This is fine tuning stuff. But yes, I would say that I know how my body operates best, and I don't always do it.
Okay. Well, there's no reason why you're supposed to always do it. So from a therapy point of view, it sounds like it's a complex issue, and probably a large component is actually in alignment with current adult perception and assessment and so forth. But to the extent that there's a compulsive element, usually that suggests that there's something at work that is not about the issue, like food, but it usually compulsivity, I find, is usually an effort, usually unconscious, to get out of deeper emotional vulnerabilities that are getting triggered. And so if you and I were to be working on this issue, I wouldn't want to obviously to pathologize the issue or ignore the fact that a lot of what you're relating to around food is very appropriate and healthy. But if you wanted to work on the compulsive aspect, then we'd look at what sort of core feelings usually have you probably been organizing parts of your life around avoiding. And that usually turns out to be a lifelong issue. And the current issue might be around food, but 5 years ago, 10 years ago, it might have been about something else. So part of the deconstructive process would be to start to, first of all, examine and clarify what are these feelings that I'm organizing my life around avoiding, because that ends up sort of perpetuating an out-of-date history. Still trying to take care of ourselves. It's not pathological. It's just out of date. And then a very direct way to deconstruct those avoidance strategies, which are just another name for neurotic organization, is to voluntarily take ourselves into exactly those feelings as we become aware of them that I really, really don't want to feel. And find out for oneself, well, where is the evidence that it's going to kill me to feel these feelings? Because I've been organizing my life for decades as if feeling them is somehow, in an unconscious way, a threat to my survival.
And do you feel like, Bruce, in this case, like, I've done a lot of work, my feelings seem to be emotions, like at this point, fairly stable, highly inspired most of the time? Would you say that even in a case like that, there's still some kind of underlying emotional ground that is there that I'm either not aware of, or that basically, like, even like kind of relatively minor compulsive behaviors are probably linked to some kind of emotional ground? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, I'd say we could count on it, or at least I count on it. I wouldn't insist that you do, but I assume so. And I assume that's true for pretty much all of us. And so I don't have an agenda for myself of cleaning up all my neuroses, because I don't really mind if they're there. To me, the work is not to gradually reduce our identification with those patterns, not thinking we're supposed to get rid of them. But there's always, nobody gets to be a human without avoidance strategies that are out of date. And if they're creating a problem for somebody, they might be motivated to go deeper and do some difficult work. If they're minor and not creating a problem, most people have a lot on their plate. And why should they sort of invite more disturbance just to have some moderate improvement about something?
That's
so somebody would have to have an idea that deconstructing or dissolving sort of apparently solid patterns of experiencing might be supportive of a larger intention of freedom or open awareness. They'd have to see it in that context rather than because it's creating big problems in their life.
Right. So in my case with food, what you're saying is, if I perceive it as relatively minor in terms of the impact, that neurotic pattern, in terms of the impact on what I'm really wanting to accomplish in my life, then I probably won't do anything about it.
Yeah, you probably wouldn't be coming to therapy to work on your food issues.
Which is why I'm not in therapy on my food issues. But
yes, you just got ambushed in the past podcast.
I got ambushed. But I do like just separating out the distinction that I'm hearing for you is that your work, it sounds like, is about really helping people enter the spaces of disturbance in themselves that they're avoiding in some way through patterns, and helping them do what with those spaces of disturbance? Build a tolerance, become non-attached to them? Like, what are you helping people do with those spaces?
Well, the invitation is probably similar to, like, in the West, traditionally it might be like desensitization work, or there's other like exposure therapies, so it's not like unique in that way. But from a Buddhist point of view, the intention is not just to increase our tolerance of disturbance and find out it's not going to harm us. Whereas when we were a little kid, probably those emotions actually might have been associated with emotional harm, to find out, oh, it's different now. I'm not a little kid. I can tolerate those. But from a Buddhist point of view, my intention, I don't expect everybody to go there, is that the more deeply we go into our immediate embodied vulnerabilities, especially, the less and less evidence we find, first of all, that there's a problem. And then beneath that, potentially we even discover no essential nature to any of this experience. And so at some point we start considering that we think we're avoiding certain difficult experience because it's a problem, and we might just find that it appears to be a problem because we're avoiding it. If we start understanding that, it's possible then we might actually start having an interest in looking in our daily life for, oh, what am I organizing my life around avoiding? It's not all of what we're doing. Of course, we're doing a lot of healthy things too, but that's not why people come to therapy. What we actually start looking for things that we claim are a problem, and intentionally going into them, and maybe over and over and over finding no evidence, first of all, that is killing us, harming us, damaging. Deeper level, no evidence of problem. And the implication there is, at a certain point, we start considering, maybe I'm not a problematic person. I'm going to be a disturbed person. I'm going to have pain. I'm going to be confused, but maybe it's not a problem to be who I am. And that can lead to potentially a very deep sense of relaxation. And then as we dissolve this fantasy of being divided against ourselves, it's not like it creates open awareness, but it generates an environment where it sort of becomes safer to have a more relaxed, expansive awareness more and more and more frequently, which, if somebody is interested, that more expansive awareness can invite more frequent moments of conscious participation in open awareness. So that, to the Buddhist point of view, is more like shifting our experiential center of gravity from all of our drama and identification with form level experience, which is pretty much everything, shifting that toward conscious participation in openness or open awareness, which of course provides no support for personal identity.
Right. Now, when one of the sayings that has stuck with me over the years of meeting you, about 20 years ago, has been commit to the disturbance.
Right. And not because we like it, but because it's there.
Right. And another saying that you're well known for is that being in a relationship or being in a partnership is an inherently disturbing experience.
Well, it is for me, so why should anybody else not have to deal with that?
I can attest to that. And speaking of relationships, I mean, when you talk about committing to the disturbance and being in a relationship, let's talk a little bit about your work with couples and your perspective on, I think you have a really interesting and unique perspective on attachment and, what happens between adults who are, who love each other, want to live together, and inevitably disturbances arise all day, every day.
Right.
And I guess my question is, what level of responsibility what is your perspective on, obviously my understanding is that within Buddhism, we're personally responsible for our own disturbance, right? There's something happening inside of me, it's disturbing, I'm responsible. And I'm curious what your point of view is about how a couple holds the disturbance that's occurring inside of one of the individuals in the couple.
Right. That's a good issue. And I'd say, well, I don't know, because I don't know, but I know a lot of therapists recently have been focusing more on approaching that issue, which I don't think has a resolution. It's just, something to work with. Approaching that from more of a connecting or maybe feminine energy point of view, where I take the position that I'm going to assume responsibility for being as kind as possible to my partner, knowing what their issues are, and actually acting, maybe, I don't know how they think of it, but acting as if I were a good parent, so that this other person can feel more safety, they can move onward and things like that. I think that's a valid approach. It's not mine. I approach it from more of a ground of personal responsibility, separateness, masculine energy, whatever. I think that both are necessary halves to say that of intimacy. I'd see intimacy as you mentioned, sort of unresolvably disturbing, provocative, difficult. I don't see intimacy as synonymous with closeness and connection, which I think, unfortunately, our culture sort of tells us. To me, the unresolvable quality is that we're always fundamentally existentially alone, and we're always trying our best to be kind to somebody we care about and who cares for us. I happen to start more from a separateness point of view, but then lead more toward connection. Other people start from a connecting point of view. Personally, I haven't heard many of those people then lead toward personal responsibility, but maybe I'm just not aware of that. So my approach, which is just as much about my characterological issues myself as about my Buddhist training, because that's why I'm drawn to it, is to start with what actually I have control over somewhat, which is working with my experience. And I find that from that point of view, it actually becomes safer to be close to somebody, show our vulnerability, extend in a kind way as we are taking better and better care of ourselves. So my particular approach is that any complaint, any disturbance I find with my partner, to use not as a signal that they're doing something wrong, but as a signal that, oh, probably somehow I am not taking adequate care of myself right now. So the point of self-care, the point of boundaries, asserting needs, constructive conflict, actually, maybe not so obviously, the point of that work is to help me to keep my heart open to my partner. But if I'm not taking adequate care of myself, I will have boundaries that then probably operate unconsciously, like shutting down sexually or closing my heart or ritualizing a relationship with a variety of problems that mysteriously don't get solved. So in a way that's in alignment with, let's say, at least Vajrayana Buddhism, it seems to make sense to me to work on being present, bring unconditional kindness toward whatever arises in my experiencing, practice personal responsibility as the ground from which then genuine compassion, care, and so forth can arise. That doesn't automatically, it's effortful. And I think, some people I work with have worked with therapists who focus more on the connecting side, and some, of course, have found that very valuable, and some have found it just doesn't work for them. But I'm sure my style doesn't work for a lot of people as well. So I try to be as vivid as possible in my style so that people know very quickly whether it might be a good fit for them or not. So is that in the ballpark of what you're asking about? Or?
Yeah, I think it is. And as I listen, I see the value of both approaches, and I agree with you that there's a vulnerability if we start with the connecting side, to leave behind the the internal, individual, personal responsibility aspect of it. I've also experienced. Go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, a good therapist with that style wouldn't leave it behind. It would just sort of be more in the background, probably.
Right. I think I would say probably most therapists have more of a character structure that's more aligned with the connecting side.
Yes,
is my guess.
Yes.
But on the other hand, I think, being deep in Vajrayana Buddhism myself for 10 years, I think my maybe misunderstanding of the teachings ran in the direction of, if I have a disturbance, I am completely and utterly alone in my disturbance, and it's up to me to relate to that disturbance, almost from the point of view that I'm ineligible for compassion and kindness from others until the time that I've actually made full contact with my own disturbance.
Well, that's probably about more your historic conditioning than about Vajrayana Buddhism.
That's what I'm saying. It's a filter.
Right, yes.
Uh-huh.
No, all of us are going to come out of childhood with some degree of black and white, all or nothing organization, because our primitive identity dramas, self-care, strategies are put into place from a Western point of view, especially when we're very, very young and very primitive little beings. And then they get carried into adulthood and necessarily challenged. So often we come into adulthood addressing things as if it's all one way or all the other way. And so, of course, a lot of our work is to keep bringing ourselves into some more complex middle ground where it turns out there's no ground to stand on. So that, from a Buddhist point of view, we want to keep challenging any tendency toward this or that, right or wrong, and instead start to cultivate more of a sense of figure ground, like they're both always there. And I'm going to lead, let's say, with connection when that's appropriate, but I'm not losing track of personal responsibility, boundaries, integrity. And other times, other moments, I'll lead with separateness, like in conflict, but I'm not losing touch with the fact that I'm having conflict with this person because I care about them. And I'm having conflict to help me keep my heart open, actually. But that's not what I'm leading with. So to me, it's a practical issue.
Let's tease out a little bit of the philosophical principles here, because
enough personal stuff.
No. I want to tease out something that you're speaking to around relationship, whether it's your partner or anyone. Relationship. Right. You mentioned the word a lot, separateness, in terms of being separate and having to face that. And I guess I want to just tease out your philosophical principle of, like, are you saying that ultimately the only experience we could truly have is separateness, or that there's also an experience of connectedness and union? Like, let's tease out a little what's happening here.
Yeah, good issue. I'm again no objective answer that anybody can prove, but my bias is that it seems to me that on a relative level, half the story, just to say it that way, is that we're all existentially alone. Nobody's ever going to get what it's like to be us. We're going to die, and probably the world will keep going. And simultaneously, we're all completely interconnected. I want to give and receive love. What you do affects me, and so forth. So from a Western point of view, culturally, like I was just saying with Will, we have an unexamined tendency in our culture to relate to concepts as if they have their own inherent nature. That probably goes back to Plato, 2,500 years ago, and that sort of tradition, that everything has its own inherent nature. So that's, we're steeped in that view. But another view, more Buddhist view, is that all of our experience is constructed on a relative level and codependently originating, meaning that you don't get white without black, and you don't get separateness without connection. So just to be sort of concrete, you can't be separate from something unless you're connected from it or with it. Separateness means that you're separating from connection. It implies connection. You can't be connected with something unless you're separate to start with. You're two separate, people connecting. So separateness and connection actually are sort of co-define each other rather than either or. And so it's not optional. It's not negotiable. There's always separateness, the appearance of separateness. There's always the appearance of connection. But in the background, you have the other energy defining what's in the foreground. That you can't pull them apart. So to me, it's a pragmatic issue, not a objective reality issue. Which of those two appearances would be helpful to focus on? And for different intentions, we focus on different energies, different experiences. For me, focusing on relationship, I think inevitably all of us are going to come out of childhood having only been trained into an experience of intimacy where we are cueing off of the other, the parent, as if we have to try to be who they want us to be. We don't get the experience of healthy adult intimacy as a child. We can't. It's impossible, even if we have good parents. So to me, the first work coming into adulthood is to explore and recover the capacity for integrity, for personal responsibility, as sort of a basic antidote to our young historic conditioning. And when people want to jump over that and go right to connection because it's more positive, it feels better, that's valid and actually will be best for some people. But I've just worked with too many people that I think are doing sort of a therapy version of spiritual bypassing, meaning I want to get out of the more difficult, sort of cold, negative feeling of separateness and go to the juicy energy of connection. But I find a lot of people with that intention sort of plateau at a certain level of connection, whether it's in relationship or Buddhist practice, where they don't keep progressing because they haven't done the foundational work.
Right. Yeah, and it sounds like you clearly are. Well, I know your work, and you seem to get some quicker results by focusing on relationship to self versus relationship to other.
Well, I might get quicker results from people who resonate with my view, but I probably won't with people who don't.
Well, they slam the door on you.
That's right. Exactly.
Right.
Which is a good choice.
Which could be a good choice for sometimes. Right. Now, how do you integrate? We're talking about the interplay of when we talk about connection to other. How are you integrating just more in the last 10 to 15 years, more of the science around co-regulation on the nervous system level, in your own mind, of just how nervous systems actually can relax together when there's a more mature nervous system in that moment?
Yeah.
How are you integrating that in your view these days?
I'm not. Because
you're just because you don't care.
I already have my views.
Yes, that's right. I'm an old guy. I'm not,
That's fair.
That's great.
So, if I had to guess, I would probably speculate that, sort of coming from the Western view of differentiation, the more that an individual can cultivate a capacity to hold the apparent contradictory energies of connection and separateness simultaneously without pretending to be in a state of struggle or needing resolution, probably their nervous system is, in fact, more relaxed themselves. And so from a differentiation point of view, the fundamental benefit we can be to our partners or to other people is to engage with them from that sort of complex capacity of feeling very connected, participative, considerate, kind, compassionate, empathic, and simultaneously not joining that person in their experience just because that's not accurate. So we maintain responsibility, we're the location of our experience, and simultaneously we stay connected. We don't abandon or attack the other person. And from that point of view, I would speculate that that's actually most reassuring to the other person in the long run. Maybe in the short run, it might feel symptomatically relieving to have somebody just join us in our version of things, but I don't think that's very sustainable in a relationship.
Right. Well, having been, how long have you been married, Bruce?
41 years now.
41 years.
Yes.
Would you say, I'm wondering if you can give us a little wisdom from the perspective of 4 decades together with Riva, and
sure. Especially because she's not here, I can make up all sorts of things.
What's different now versus, the first 10 years of your relationship?
Oh, gee. The first 10 years, we met actually in the Naropa program. So, we met going to group therapy 3 times a week. That's how we met.
Okay.
So we didn't have sort of a nice slow beginning that way. But I'd say the first 10 years were, fairly chaotic. I don't know about for Riva, but she plays the more connecting role. I play the more separateness role, like that. So we had our conflicts about that. From my side, because I have that separateness, both the neurotic as well as the sane aspect of it. Anytime I'd feel hurt or whatever, I'd have fantasies. Oh, maybe I should get a divorce. This is what's the point of this? Like that. I think underneath that, with my own panic, that I could be abandoned at any moment, and so I'd better be prepared for it, like that. So I think conflict in the first, let's say, just to say 10 years, was much more sort of anxiety provoking, because I think it carried probably for both of us, but certainly for me, this sort of anxiety that, maybe this is the end of the relationship. I think given time, we found that, in fact, we were still choosing to be together. And gradually, I think we were able to tolerate our differences more overtly without having to sort of try to disguise them in order to avoid the anxiety about loss of relationship. And we have kids who are twin girls who are 26 right now. So, that was a lot of what was going on for a while. And
would you say that process, when I hear you talk about, more insecurity and going into more security, I think about secure functioning and, more adult functioning. Does that resonate? Is that a frame that is useful to you in terms of, when you talk about, well, I was afraid that the maybe I need to get a divorce, or maybe the relationship's over, I'm going to be abandoned at any moment, moving into more overt and more conscious tolerance for each other's quirks. Is that, would you say that a relationship develops into more and more secure functioning when things go well?
I don't know, because I don't use that language, so I'm not sure exactly what you mean by it, but I would say that for me, as we've been talking about, the most practical location of secure functioning is an increased confidence in my willingness and ability to be aware of, stay embodied with, be kind to anything and everything that arises in the stream of my experiencing. So to me, if I can be kind to my pain and fear and so forth, then I can be kind to my partner who's guaranteed to trigger that. If I'm aggressive to my vulnerability, then I will be aggressive to the partner who's triggering that.
Right. That makes sense.
Yeah. And so, I think both of us have grown in our own different ways. But, for quite a while, I haven't felt, sometimes I do, but I don't usually feel very captured by my experience. So I haven't found a lot of, intense drama happening in our relationship in the last number of years.
So another way of kind of speaking to this is like, for you, is relationship just a process and there's no way to define any spectrum of health or unhealth in relationship? Or is there an aim for you around a version of what health or secure functioning or what that would be in a relationship? Or is it just for you a process and it's just everybody's in it at wherever they are?
Well, maybe some combination of those two, not either or again, but more of the first and less of the second. I don't do my work in reference to a theory. I've made up my theories coming out of my work as I've been curious about it and wrote the book and stuff like that. So I do see what I think is a potential of a progression. Like in the book, I just sort of elaborated what other people like Ken Wilber onward have been talking about as far as stages like pre-personal, personal, interpersonal, and non-personal. I think that has some relevance, but I don't work based on trying to move somebody along a certain stage. I try to work in terms of immediate experience because my opinion is we're only living in the present moment ever. So our present experience is all that we can really be aware of and the only moment of intervention we can ever make. And then we do our best and see how things unfold, but they're always unfolding in the present moment. So we're always working in the present moment, regardless of whether we think we're talking about the past or planning for the future along some stage work or something. So my interest is really in immediacy, especially embodied immediacy, and bringing more awareness to the inherently fresh, disturbing, unknowable, new moment that we're always stepping into at all times.
So it sounds like what you're saying is basically immediacy is the aim. It's just to help people enter immediacy of the moment. And it's not about categorizing at all past and future moments of health or unhealth, or it's just about helping people arrive into the moment.
Well, they're already in the moment, but most of us are pretending not to be. So it's not like we have to get into the moment. It's more about relaxing our fundamental sort of panic to the point where we can more and more frequently take the risk of just being present with not knowing who we are, not knowing what we're doing, da 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 da. But as far as skillful means, it's, as a therapist, I find it often very helpful to talk about progression of stages, about young developmental issues, about directions and intentions that somebody might want to move in. And people I work with probably are often taking that seriously. But from my point of view, all of that is in service of a variety of views and reframes and experiences that might invite somebody to actually bring their attention into their immediate experiencing and see for themselves, so it's not some ideology, where's any evidence of problem.
So, and then for you, in terms of if we take this into more of behavior, and when we look at, if somebody comes to you and is like, I'm addicted to crack, how do I change that behavior? Is your opinion around like, we never need to talk about change of behavior. Let's just talk about getting your attention into the immediacy of the moment and behavior will follow? Or how does that work with behavior?
Well, I have an idea that there's always different levels of experiencing happening simultaneously. A lot of people talk about that in different ways. I sometimes just say there's behavior, there's thinking and communicating, self-talk, there's emotional experience, and then if you're into it, there's awareness experience. And I find behavior as sort of the level of experience that where we can intervene most quickly. And so a lot of times I'll start with the behavioral level with the idea we're all whole, whatever that means, people. And so changing our behavior does resonate down through how we think and how we feel, but it's the fastest level of intervention usually. So if somebody comes in and they want to work with an addiction, depending on their level of display about being sort of ambivalent or resistance or something, I might start by just saying, well, what's wrong with just being a Coke addict for the rest of your life? I mean, it's what you're choosing to do. Why not just give yourself permission to do that if that's what you choose to do? You know, by doing that, I'm making taking a position that I'm not going to be induced to play the change agent for them. Because when people have very contradictory feelings about changing patterns of self-destructive self-care, let's say, a lot of times they will try to induce others to be the voice of discipline or change, and then they'll resist that because they have contradictory feelings, and then the therapist ends up feeling impotent and frustrated and stuff like that. So whenever somebody presents strong ambivalence or so forth, I almost always step out of any invitation to make therapy about changing them, which is, again, inviting them to take personal responsibility for the fact they have contradictory feelings. But then if we proceed, I might just say, well, look, it's almost certain that in addition to any physiological addiction, which is real, this is probably serving an emotional function, the way you're describing it. If you do you want to find out, what that emotional function is? I don't usually claim they do. And so I'll say, well, if you really want to, how about just not using for a month or 6 months? Don't drink for 6 months. Don't use Coke or something, whatever. Don't eat compulsively. And the point isn't that it's the Coke or the eating that's the issue. It's the underlying vulnerability that you're trying to escape from with compulsive behavior. So if you want, don't do the behavior, and probably what you're trying not to feel will start to arise into your awareness. Then you can decide if you want to work with it or not.
Thanks for that answer. So let's wrap up, Bruce. We asked this question to every single guest, which is if you had a billboard that a human being would see, every human being on the planet would see once in their life, it has a paragraph on it, what would you want them to know?
Well, that's not a real issue for me. So, but in the spirit of your question, I don't know. The thing that pops into my mind would be not that they know something. It would be like maybe to put a big mirror on the billboard and underneath it say, be kind to this person.
Grateful. Bruce, really grateful. Thank you for your time.
Oh, well, sure. I enjoy talking about these things. So thank you for inviting me.